Hello, and welcome to a new edition of Cracking Cryptic for this weekend's Killer Sudoku deadly rated puzzle in the Times. Apologies it's a bit late this week. I've been spending all my puzzling time doing the red dot puzzle hunt, which some of you may be interested to try the puzzles from. They're available on the internet. Absolutely fantastic. Pretty difficult. So yeah, take a look at that. Really recommend it. And without further ado, I'll put in the obvious ones for this puzzle. Okay, there's a few things that should immediately be jumping out of you. This cell here can only be a 6, so let's put that in. And then this cell here can only be an 8, because we've got the 7, 9 and the 16 box over here. Let's fill that in. And then obviously this has to be an 8, and this has to be a 9. And we can see as well, we can immediately place a 6 in this box because we have a 6, 8, 9 here, and the 6 in, and the 6 can't be in an 8 in 3 because otherwise the other two cells would have to be a 1, which is impossible. So there's another given cell. And in fact in row 8 we can see we need to place a 7, and there's simply nowhere to do that apart from in this position here, so we should also take advantage of that. Noting now we've got 7, 8, 9 in column 9. And just an interesting thing I can immediately see, which I can't see as helpful necessarily, but we have an 8, 9 in these two cells, and we have a 22 in the middle box here. Now 22 must contain a 9, so we know that we have a 9 in one of these cells and a 9 in these two cells. So we know the 9 in box A has to be in one of these cells. Yeah, so it either has to be here or here. I don't think we can tell which immediately, but we should note that. The next obvious thing I can see though is this cell here, and we can use our rule of 45. So we have 23, and plus 8 is 31, plus 7, 38. So this has to be a 7 in order to make this box add up to 45, and therefore we can fill in the 1 here. And we can use similar logic on row 9 here. So we have 23, and we have 7 here, so that's 30. But within this 20 box, we've already got a 6, so we know these three cells add up to 14. So this cell must be a 1 in order for the whole row to equal 45. Perhaps we could note that there's a 1 in one of these two positions. And then just using simple Sudoku logic, we know that we've got a 9 in column 9 here, and a 9 in column 7, so we need to put a 9 in one of these three cells, and obviously it can only go here. Let's fill that in. There's a couple of ways to make progress from here. One of them, a slightly more complicated way of doing it, would be to notice that the bottom 4 rows here allow you to isolate the value of these 3 cells, because in order that these 4 rows sum to 180, which they must, you can add up all of the boxes that are contained completely within these 4 rows, and you'll just be left with these 3 cells as sort of additional, and you know that they must be the difference between 180 and the sum of every other box in the 4 rows. And I think if you do that, you would get the answer 14. Now if you get 14 for these 3 boxes, we've already got 25 from this 1, this 7, 9 and this 8. So that's total sums to 39, and therefore you know that this cell can only be a 2 and a 4, and this cell can only be a 2 and a 4, because we already have a 1 and we need to make a 6. So that's some quite advanced, I suppose, killer Sudoku stuff that we've done there. The other, perhaps just a slightly simpler way of looking at this would be to notice that in this row 9, we have an 8 in these 3 cells, and we have an 8 here. So we know that one of these 2 cells is an 8, Let's just note that and see where that leaves us. And you can immediately see that we need to make 6 for the other 2 cells in this 14 box. And we have to do that without using a 1, because the 1 here prevents either of these cells being a 1 and this cell being a 1 actually, which this cell does too. So we know in fact that this 14 box is made up of 2, 4, 8 in its entirety, and that would have actually allowed you to back into that first piece of logic as well. Rather interestingly now, we could do this one of 2 ways. It's perhaps easier to do it a different way, but we can see that with this 2, 4 here, we can now sum all of these boxes here, so box B, C, D and E, and we'll be able to isolate the value of this cell. Now we can actually also do that, because of the way this particular killer Sudoku works, by looking at box A and box D here, because all of the boxes within box A and box D and this 1 here will allow us to isolate the value of these 2 cells. And rather helpfully, I think that what we have in these boxes here means that these 2 cells within the 11 box need to add to 7. And that being the case, this would have to be a 4. And you can immediately see that's going to be extremely helpful, because that's going to force this to be a 4. And that means this is a 2 and this is an 8, which also allows us to conclude this 13 can only be made up of a 6, 7, so we should note that. And this may well be the point at which the puzzle really starts to break down, because now we've worked out what this 8 must be. All sorts of things are going to flow from this. So this cell now is forced to be a 4, just by this 4 box needs to add up to 20. This box here can only be 2, 5. It's the only way of making this box add up to 7 now, which means this box here needs to be 1, 3. So we still need to place a 3 in this 3 by 3, and that means it's 4. And we can now use a little bit more Sudoku logic. I don't know why, but I looked at this 7 in column 1. If we just shoot this upwards, we can see that we can't actually put a 7 in any of these 3 cells because of the 14 stopping the 7 being here. So the 7 has to be in one of these 3 cells. In fact, it can only be in the 20. So if we note that, we now see that within this 16, this now has to be a 9, and the 7 is over here. We place the 2 here, so this actually means we can force this out here, which is going to be helpful, because now what do we need to still place in? So we need a 3 and a 9 still in column 4, and we can't place a 3 in the 22, so that has to take the 9, and that has to be the 3. Means we have a 9 here and an 8 here. And then the 4 we've now isolated in this cell. It means that the 8 has to be a 1, 2, 5 version of the 8 and 3, which is nice because it gives us a good start on row 1. So remembering that this 11 box adds to 7, I think the only options here are 3, 6, because the 7 and the 8 can't obviously go in this box because it'll make it too large. So this can only be 1 or a 6. And when I say a 1 and a 6, I'm obviously meaning a 1 and a 4. Let's just change that to a 4, and we can see that the 4 variant of that doesn't work because we already have a 4 in the box. So this has to be a 6, and this has to be a 1, which is another very helpful piece of information, because now this 14 is forced to be 5, 9, and the 9 can only go in the top here, which limits this to 8, 6, and I think the puzzle is now broken in the sense that it's going to be trivial to finish it. So immediately, just by adding the notes in here, this 6 has to be 2, 4, which means this 7 is forced to be 3, 4, 2, 4. Which places 6 and an 8 here, which add up to 14, so this must be 5. This must be 1. 4, 5, 6. So we can put an 8 here, which means this is an 8. This is a 7. This is 2, 3. This is 2, 3, which means this is a 4. I think we can do the rest of it to music, because I think, you know, we've done enough of it now that it will just it will yield quite quickly. I mean, I'm not even having to stop and really think here. It's just filling in the numbers. So I hope this is useful. There was one interesting step to this puzzle, you know, which probably did take a little bit of thought, even for some of the really good solvers out there. So I'd be interested to see if you saw a quicker way to do it. And we'll see you again tomorrow for a vlog on the crossword. Thanks for watching.